So I want to talk to you today about two projects that we at BITSS have, which are both of them are related to scholarly communication, essentially how we review scholarly findings and how we communicate them. We claim no intellectual credit for inventing either of these things. However, these are sort of new applications of existing concepts in new context. So, you know me. At BITSS, I work on institutionalizing transparency with journals and research institutions. And my background is in public policy. You know this one as well. I'm going to show it to you one last time. And the first part of my talk, essentially my talk about our register reports project, will be relevant to the research design stage, essentially pre-analysis plans and pre-registration in particular, but then also the review stage later on. And then the second half of my talk will be about preprints, obviously, and preprints belong to the dissemination stage of the RT2 roadmap. So why do we care about? Why do we do these things? Well, the motivation is essentially can be summarized in two words: publication bias. And I don't think I should spend too much time explaining what publication bias is, because you all guys heard about it on day one. However, we worry about this because we lose countless hours of effort and countless resources on doing work that never eventually sees the light of day. And this signal is so strong that it demotivates researchers to even write up certain findings in the first place. So the graph that I have here, you might recognize from some of the talks on day one, but is essentially a graph from a paper by Annie Franco and others from 2014. They tracked down the results and the publication outcomes of around 220 NSF high quality, highly competitive studies. And what they learned was that studies with strong results are 40% more likely to be published and 60% more likely to be written up than studies with null results. So this is problematic because essentially we as the research community, but then also policymakers in the real world, are deprived from essentially enriching our knowledge with a lot of this work. So how do the things that I'm going to talk about address these? So the first one, registry reports, or in economics, we try to push for the term pre-results review, essentially takes out the results out of the equation of how we consider work for publication. So essentially, we focus on the credibility of the research design and the importance of the research question. And then the second part of my talk, which is going to be about preprints, essentially we provide an alternative way of sharing these research findings through an open access and a quick mode of publication. So you probably know what register reports are by now. In my view, register reports are what would come out if journal editors were to attend day one of RT2. Essentially, they incorporate pre-analysis plans formally into the review process. They split the review process into two stages. Stage one focuses on the research design and the importance of the research question, after which you get what is called in-principle acceptance, which is essentially a virtually guaranteed publication, regardless of the nature of your findings. And then at the second stage, after you've collected and analyzed your data and you've written up your paper, you get sort of a confirmation of your in-principle acceptance and ultimately a full paper which is being published. Register reports are on the rise across the disciplines. They started off in psychology in 2012, the journal Cortex being the first to implement them. Right now, there's 207 journals across the social sciences accepting articles in this format. Most of them are in psychology and the behavioral sciences. However, the one that I'm going to talk about today is in development economics, and they are in the inception stage in that field in particular. An encouraging insight from the early results of register reports suggests that null findings do come up, though this may be self-selection because we have only a couple of hundred publications in this format across the sciences. However, they suggest that for replications, roughly 2/3 of register reports end up with null findings, and then for original studies, around 55%. So, about the project that we've been working on at BITSS with the Journal of Development Economics. We started off in 2018, in March, officially. Our key partners are Andy Foster, the chief editor-in-chief of the journal, and Dean Carlin. We supported the process. We supported the launch of this project through development of and customization of editorial resources. We did outreach. We provided a help desk for researchers who wanted to apply for submit their work for this track. So just to lead you through some of those. One item that we developed that I'm particularly proud of is this template for what a stage 1 register report submission should look like. It essentially guides researchers through the process of developing and documenting the research design, and eventually, once you answer all these questions, you end up with a stage 1 register report. And we've received an overwhelmingly positive feedback on this, and I think it has been used by virtually all of the submissions in this track so far, even though it wasn't required. So how far along are we with the process? Roughly 18 months since we started. We've received 57 submissions. So these are stage 1 submissions. Essentially, they're yet to go in the field. They're yet to collect data. We recently received the stage 2 submission of one of the articles that was accepted first. So that's exciting. We're probably going to have our first publication pretty soon. And in terms of how fast the process goes, it's somewhat comparable. It's somewhat faster than the regular submission process. However, this is a very limited sample size, so things may change. And yeah, as you can see, articles that we've received 6 acceptances so far, and they take on average 114 days. This accounts from the initial submission through multiple stages of revise and resubmit. So some of the things that we've learned from the pilot so far. We think that this process encourages well-thought experiments. Whoa. Wait, what? Okay. Little comedy relief. So because this was a pilot, as we were going along, we were interviewing authors who had gone through the whole stage 1 process of review, and then initial feedback suggests that authors find it incredibly useful to have gone through the process. The feedback that they get is very constructive because there's no results to criticize. But then also, peer review at this point comes early enough in the research cycle when you get feedback, it's still early enough to address it before you actually implement your experiment. This is counterintuitive. However, reasons for rejection are somewhat similar to regular papers, in the sense that papers that address questions which aren't of interest to the literature, that have limited contribution to the literature, papers where the power analysis is over optimistic, papers that don't report the research design in enough clarity, and it's necessary to report things very clearly because that's the basis on which your paper is adjudicated. And then, as I said, registry reports have been implemented in other disciplines, mostly psychology. However, the experience in development economics, in particular, has some discipline-specific features which I find interesting. Namely, the timelines of implementation are radically different. So these are not your typical lab experiments which take, well, psychologists in the room will know better. But they take years in development economics. So this may mean that by the time, it may take a while before we see all the acceptances in stage one actually come through with full papers, which is not too bad. It actually may make the in-principle acceptance, the early in-principle acceptance, the more valuable for researchers in this subdiscipline because it gives sort of early signal of the quality of your work. Another interesting characteristic of registered reports in development economics is that comes with the simple dynamics of implementing field experiments. So a lot of things can go wrong. In principle, registered reports should be implemented as based on the research design that was accepted at stage one to the dot. However, we allow a bit more flexibility because of these practical considerations, as long as deviations from the pre-specified research design are reported clearly and they're justified. And then in other fields, journals tend to have a relatively strict rule that you have to submit your paper before you've collected any data. However, what we've learned so far through the pilot is that it's actually useful to have baseline data collected because it's useful to provide justification for your power analysis, but then also just to demonstrate like sort of initial feasibility of your study. Another big lesson learned, as I pointed out with the template before, is that resources and templates like that are very useful to facilitate adoption. So we went into this project knowing that a lot of things will be very, very new to a lot of the researchers. So having that sort of template as a sort of like a crutch was very useful for researchers, and I think facilitated adoption. And then finally, based on the research design and based on the characteristic of the studies that have been submitted and have been accepted so far, this seems to be very well suited for your classical RCT, so classical experiment, classical impact evaluation. This may change in the future, but yeah, as you may remember, Ted was talking about how pre-registration can be applied into other scenarios, typically most primarily the Newmark study, for example, and then also those who attended Fiona's presentation about observational pre-analysis plans, we can easily imagine this format being implemented in that kind of context. So that's part one of my talk. Part two is about preprints. So preprints are open access manuscripts which are submitted to a preprint repository. So this is a designated service before they're submitted to the journal, before they undergo peer review. The words that are highlighted there are very important. So open access prior to peer review. You as a researcher can submit just about anything as a preprint. So it can be a working paper, it can be a paper which has just been submitted to the journal for peer review unless it's specifically prohibited by the journal. You can submit dissertations, you can submit white papers, you can submit posters, pretty much anything that can be fitted onto a PDF and uploaded to the internet can be a preprint. Oops. there's a lot of preprint services. So regardless of your discipline, subdiscipline, interest, chances are you will be able to find a preprint service which is relevant for your field. And why these services are good? Well, primarily, I mean, I'm sure all of you have submitted journal articles, and you've faced the incredible fees for submission, and even if you haven't, you're aware of journal subscription fees. So preprints being open access facilitate this, or completely remove financial barriers to publication. So for example, just to name a few instances where we've seen how harsh the effects of journal subscription fees are. UC Berkeley, or the UC system, has discontinued the subscription with Elsevier earlier this year. Same thing happened in Germany, in Sweden, and Sweden. More examples of similar instances. This is an interesting way from Dutch universities to go around this problem, where they instruct the researchers whose research has been supported through public funding to sort of self-archive, and through that allow open access to their work. And then this is a recent development from the UC system. Around 200 researchers, 200 UC faculty from the biomedical sciences have threatened to leave their editorial positions with journals run by Elsevier unless they renegotiate the deal and are more flexible with open access. Despite this, companies like Elsevier, for example, which holds around quarter of the market with journals, record incredible profit margins of over 30%. Just to have just to give a comparison, companies like Google and Apple are in the 20 to 24% range. So that's bad, and preprints try to address that. Another benefit of why preprints are good is because it's literally like uploading a PDF to a repository. So it's a swift publication mode, and if you upload your work early, they give you an opportunity to get feedback very early in your research in your research cycle, regardless of whether you submit to a journal or not. And then most services also issue DOIs. So DOIs ensure that your work is traceable in the long run, and also having specialized preprint services makes your work easier to discover through people who are interested in the subject matter of the preprint service. Sharing your work early makes it possible to get more visibility. Some early work suggests that papers which in the biomedical sciences, again, the papers that were shared on a preprint service also increased, had more citations when they eventually ended up in a journal, probably because it gave the other researchers an opportunity to get more familiarized with the work. And then finally, in my mind, the biggest benefit of preprints is that you can post things on there regardless of whether you have no findings or not. So irrespective of the nature of your result. So if you're in the business of doing meta research, we have good news for you. BITSS runs. We run our own preprint service. It's called the Meta Archive. It was formerly known as BITSS Preprints. It runs on the OSF preprint service. And we like to position it as sort of the go-to repository for meta-scientific research. And in terms of the topical scope of what you could find on there, think about the research cycle, the RT2 roadmap. So anything that is mentioned on there can easily fit well onto meta-archive. So basically, when you upload a preprint, we ask 3 questions. One is it relevant? So as I said, as long as the focus is in meta research, it's meta scientific research, it crosses this, it ticks this box. Is it scholarly? As long as it's not ideological work, so you've actually done research, we can post it. And then does the author of the person submitting match the author's names on the paper? And then, as I said, it provides a good opportunity to get early feedback. So Hypothesis, an annotation software add-on, is integrated with meta-archive. And then we also, I try to do a good job of promoting whatever is posted on our preprint service through social media. We include it in our newsletter, so it gets even more exposure. So what are some of the common concerns for people posting preprints? What if I get scooped? So the way to think about this is posting preprints on a preprint online. It gives you sort of like a time-stamped verification that of your precedence over whatever idea that you're presenting in the paper. So you can, if someone tried to scoop you, you can say, well, I came up with the idea first. If you're worried about whether a journal that you're submitting later on would take issue with you posting a preprint, you should just consult Sherpa Romeo, this resource which lists the policies of most journals in relation to preprints. Copyright laws. Okay. And then what if it's not ready yet? Well, it's up to you to decide when your work is ready to be shared. However, the earlier you share it, the more opportunities you will have to get good feedback, so share early. And then if you're convinced, it's very easy to upload a preprint. So just go to osfio/preprint/meta-archive and just click that green button, and we hope to see your preprints. Or you can also just browse. If you have any questions, this is my email. Thank you.